Hello, it's my pleasure to welcome an adjunct assistant professor at Bowling Green State University, adjunct senior lecturer at University of Akron, and part-time faculty at Fortis College, Cuyahoga Falls. Dr. Bernadette Paul, you are welcome to Morbidity and Mortality podcast.
Thank you.
All right. Here we just like to, discuss. We just like to rub minds together. And today we are going to focus on a couple of things. One, the COVID-19 is still the key public health issue. And we're going to touch on the disaster that happened in Texas recently. And if time permits, we'll talk a little bit about leadership and climate change. Is that okay with you?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks. So as you may well know, recently in Texas, they experienced a huge winter storm, which took a lot of lives and properties. And you would think that states in America would have learned some lessons from the Hurricane Katrina in 2017. But I just want to ask you one key question. What are the relationship between the winter storm in the state of Texas just recently and the Hurricane Katrina events? And if you can bring up some public health perspectives to it, that would be awesome.
All right, yes, thanks. Now, both the hurricane and the winter storm are considered seasonal events because we have a hurricane season and we have our winter. And they're also both natural events. Now, we know that these natural events can become severe and they can have disastrous consequences. Like your hurricanes, they can cause catastrophic damage. And we know that most of the hurricane-related deaths are usually due to unintentional injury, and that means that they are preventable. Winter storms also can be catastrophic, and the deaths caused could also be prevented. Now, in terms of public health, those two events, hurricanes and winter storms, they have some public health implications because, in public health, we know that disaster preparedness is something that's very serious and very important. Because if we do not prepare for a disaster, then we can have loss of life and loss of property. We can have many diseases coming out of some of these catastrophic natural events. Like with the hurricanes, you have floods, you have water systems being compromised. Like with the storm, the snowstorm, you had electricity compromised, and that compromised many other things. It compromised people's health, it compromised water supply, food supply. Some scientists lost their experiments because of, the storm. Now, when we talk about public health, I see public health professionals as game changers and leaders. And so in terms of natural events and natural disasters, preparedness is key. And public health leads the way in preparing. Public health leads the way in guiding people as to how to prepare. And this is not just guiding governments or mayors and cities, it's guiding families, it's guiding businesses. And so there is where we learn in public health that you work, and in other professions, you work in a team. And here is where public health will be part of that planning team so that every city can be prepared for these natural events. Because we know that natural events occur. But what we don't know is how mild or how dangerous they can become. And here is where planning, we say, what if? You always will have one or two what if scenarios, and make your planning geared towards all the scenarios.
Interesting. I think you hit the points right there. Why we are saying these, some key elements jumped out. You mentioned that this storms are seasonal and some are natural, and you also say that some of them are preventable. And you brought up the issue of disaster preparedness. When you said disaster preparedness, my mind went to disaster management. In this particular instance, in this Texas winter storm, what worked and what did not work with regards to disaster management?
Before I even touch on that,
okay.
FEMA defines preparedness as a continuous cycle of planning, organizing, training, equipping, exercising, evaluating, and taking corrective action so as to ensure effective coordination during response to any event or an incident. And being prepared saves lives, and being prepared gets help to populations and communities in a more organized and maybe in a faster manner than it would happen if there was no planning.
Right.
Planning takes time, and planning ahead takes time. And, with that said, to the question as what worked and what did not work or what happened, something worked. Right. I am not sure what did, but I would like to give credit to the people involved that something worked. But what was apparent to me, and I'm not sure if it was apparent to others, is that if they had a disaster preparedness plan, it was not widely distributed, or it was not followed. And I would like to think that there was a disaster preparedness plan. And, I would just like to say maybe things happened too quickly, and so they were not able to follow the plan. Now, with that said, planning at the city level, planning at the community level, planning at the individual household level is very, very important. And what we do not know is if there were any public health, public service messages about disaster preparedness. If these messages, but I don't know if there were messages that were, aired on TV, on radio, or television, or, on the different platforms to at least make people aware that we live in an area where we're prone to certain disasters. We don't get snow every year, but then we should always be prepared. I would like to think that they had a disaster preparedness plan, but they did not get to it. And that is why I would say something worked, but I'm not sure what did. But what I do know is that it appeared as though the plan was not followed.
Yeah, I think I will think in your perspective that means something worked, but probably what worked, what was not followed, or what they had in place to work was not followed.
Yeah.
Because I know that Texas is a huge state, and they have they have disaster management teams and stuff like that. Probably, like you said, again, things happen so fast, and again, they hopefully maybe they weren't expecting the disaster to assume such a huge a huge a huge magnitude.
Yeah.
They were thinking it was going to be a little snowstorm, and it will come and go. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. So that brings me to the question of climate change. What has climate change, if anything, got to do with this storm?
I like that question because climate change has a role, to play in increasing the intensity of snowfall during winters. And that's because of climate change, we have more moisture being held in the atmosphere. And that turns, heavier than normal, it provokes heavier than normal precipitations. And that heavier than normal includes heavier snowfall in places where never ever got snow. And I would like to think that climate change did have something to do with it. And because I think I was reading that they had an event similar in terms of snow about 10 years ago. And as we know, the climate is becoming warmer. And so you have, that will provoke some unexpected storms. So climate change did have, I think, it did have a role to play. But, I can't help but thinking, preparing.
Right.
I tell people, I even tell my students, you prepare for an exam, okay? You're going on the floor for your clinicals, you have to prepare for that. You don't want to go unprepared. And it's the same thing I tell people when I go into the community, prepare. You should always be prepared for the unexpected. And I'm sure this is something I grew up with. I always heard my mom and my dad say that. Be prepared for the unexpected. It therefore means have a plan A, B, C, and D. So that if plan A doesn't work, you've got 3 backup plans.
Right.
And so, once again, I'd like to say that we know that climate change is real. And so we need to prepare. And I think something that we could learn from this is that Mother Nature is in control.
Right.
We are not in control of Mother Nature.
Right.
And so when Mother Nature warns us that something is about to happen, we need to take heed. And I think the only way we can take heed is by planning.
Right.
Because if you plan, yes, things could go wrong, but you have a plan. Use the plan.
Absolutely. I think it was the Boy Scout motto that said, be prepared.
Exactly.
Yeah, be prepared. Yeah, let me take you back to this disaster management again, because it's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I know that in disaster planning, communication is key, and constant communication. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of public messaging. So what communication tools could have been used by the Texas authorities in properly passing on the message to the public?
One of the things that one of the keys to effective communication is portraying to the persons receiving your message that you believe in what you're saying.
Mm.
And so one of the key things is public service messages could be helpful. Community meetings, text messages. We have so much of technology at our fingertips. And I think that maybe a Facebook message,
Twitter,
Twitter, you know, Instagram.
Yep.
Another key to communication is meeting your audience where they are.
Right.
And so for me, finding the ways that your community would listen and communicate and use those means to get the messages out.
Right.
But once again, your messages have to be believable.
Right.
You know, you can't just say, hey, there's a storm coming, but you know, you have to make sure that you say there's a storm coming and we're not sure what is going to happen, but I would like you to prepare for two scenarios. One scenario is if the storm is just mild, but prepare for just in case the storm is heavy and just stock your 5 gallons of water or you know, it must be believable and usable. So, you know, use all the technology at your fingertips.
Right.
I'm hoping that the next time or for the future, I'm sure, you know, they're working, professionals are working to make sure that this does not happen again. Or even if it does happen, it's not that severe. We don't lose so many lives. People are not caught unaware, you know.
Right on. Disaster management and public health preparedness, they both goes hand in hand. So how did these two elements, you know, how did they fare during this storm again? You know,
I'll be honest with you with what I've seen. I'm still asking. There was a divorce somewhere that there was a disconnect somewhere. You know, and I would like to hope that it was just because everybody was caught unaware. Because I somehow think that, you know, I know that every county, the public health professionals work with the city. They work hand in hand. And so, as I said earlier, I would like to think that there was a plan, but something went wrong. And, you know, as we know, communication is key. In any preparation, you have to communicate.
right.
And so if there was a plan and not everyone knew of it, well, then I'm hoping that that's corrected. If there was a plan and everybody knew of it, but didn't act on it, I hope that that is corrected in the future. But yeah, when it comes to public health and disaster management and preparedness, that is a key, one of the key jobs of public health is to help to save, not save, but keep the society and the community safe as possible by using all the different means possible.
Right on. Well, you've mentioned leaders being prepared and, you know, public health professionals built for events, unforeseen events like this. But how can leaders be prepared for this type of avoidable public health crisis? Let me tell you my justification for calling this crisis avoidable. One, we don't live in a third world country. This is a first world developed country. Secondly, like you mentioned, technologies are just at our fingertips. They have technologies to forecast and forewarn people about conditions like this that will be coming their way. And lastly, some other states where it snows constantly, like Colorado, Alaska, they have never for one day experienced such a catastrophe. So, Dr. Paul, I want you to help me here. What happened to public health leaders' preparedness in this crisis?
You know, I like that question because, yes, we are a first world country, we're a developed country, but, you know, like everything else, plans fall apart. And in this case, I think that there was a breakdown in communication somewhere, because I'm sure all the public health professionals were, you know, maybe holding their heads and saying, oh my gosh, what happened? How did this happen? And so, key here, communication. It's the key. Communication, and I don't know, it still baffles me that, you know, people were left without water and electricity for a long time and so on. People died. And I'm thinking that there was a breakdown somewhere along the line, somewhere. I know that they must have had a disaster preparedness plan, but the communication, something happened. Because we know we're from developing countries, and we know that when communication goes wrong, it's chaos. And it's plain to see that something went wrong somewhere. And I know, I would like to say that I know that the public health professionals in this situation did due diligence to plan for a disaster. If they planned for one of this magnitude, I don't know. But the evidence just did not show, you know, and it makes me sad, because we tell our children that they've got to prepare for school tomorrow, right? And we punish them if they don't. Okay, if you don't prepare for an exam, you fail. And this, we could use that analogy here, because preparedness, something went wrong, and what happened? We had a catastrophe. So in this case, I would say, you know, there was a plan, hopefully, and communication just broke down somewhere along the line. I do hope, though, that for the future, they can, you know, look at other states and learn how they prepare, you know, and not look at states who have always have snow. Look at states who have had the similar experience of just having snow, just like that. See what they did, and use that along with what other states that usually have snow. Use the two plans and see if they could come up with something that's workable for Texans. Because the sad thing is that the amount of money that was lost, you've got research. A lot of people lost their specimens because of the no electricity. So that's money. You know, a lot of people lost food. And my biggest thing, I always have a problem when there is a water shortage. Because one, hydration is key. Two, you need water to cook. So it poses a bigger public health problem when you have those issues.
Right on. The cost implication of this most recent Texas winter storm is humongous. And yeah. I recall, I think it was Hurricane Harvey. They lost about $225 billion to that disaster, you know, and this is happening again Who knows how much uh, um, they're going to come up as cost uh, involvement of this disaster. It baffles me that we are not proactive when using public funds. It baffles me. Not to get into the politics of this issue, but I think it's high time public health professionals band together and begin to make active begin to participate actively, in politics, so that they can begin to hone in or refashion or redirect politicians on key things that matters when it comes to public health crisis. Look at COVID-19, most public health practitioners, came together and spoke with one voice. And despite the political, tussles and winds that blew, you know, um, the public got the message. However, there are still people out there who got the message, but were recast. They did not want to obey public health calling, due to one issue or the other. So Dr. Paul, I appreciate you coming to Morbidity and Mortality podcast today.
Can
Uh,
I say something,
Please go
please?
ahead. Yes.
You touched on something key, COVID.
Right.
I was holding my head and wondering, you know, what's going to happen to the people in Texas, because when we have COVID, some people were due to get the vaccines. What was going to happen to storage? So, and the fact that you talked about COVID, it makes me remember it's a circle.
It is. It is.
And one thing affects something else.
Mhm.
And as you said, some people got the message, and I only hope that now that we have vaccines, people read the science and not read the fake science, but the real science, because there's some really convincing fake stuff out there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I do hope that maybe states can look at the plans they put in place to combat COVID, and maybe take a page out of that plan, or a step out of that plan, and see how they could use it to work in disaster preparedness and management.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because of the fact that there are so many, like you put it, there are so many seemingly authoritative fake news out there, that is why we started this podcast, Morbidity and Mortality podcast, so that we can give people factual information with regards to public health. But we are hopeful that one day people will begin to listen to what public health experts and practitioners are saying, and begin to also not just listen, but act upon the guidelines, public health organizations like CDC are putting out there, because these are people who have decades of public health experience. When they say something, they have experienced it.
Exactly.
They are not politicians. They are not your regular politicians. So these are researchers. These are people who have dedicated their lives to propelling public health matters and issues.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. And
Yeah.
one of the things that COVID did, public health was already there, but public health professionals would do their job. And now with COVID, a lot of people are reaching out to public health professionals and asking questions, because now COVID has made people realize that, yes, the science, if you listen to the scientists and you listen to the health professionals, it's true. And I don't know about you, but I've been getting a lot of more questions from people, because it's okay, yes, there's a lot of stuff out there. Is this true? Like, I have a friend, she would send me something every week and she would say, if you say that this is not true, it's okay. I'm going to just throw it as trash.
Sure.
And so one thing that that COVID did is just pushed us a little more out there and made people realize that public health is essential. It is essential.
It is very essential, Dr. Paul. And on that note, I want to know if you have any final thoughts.
Yes, thanks. I just want to say thanks for having me. And for all of you listeners, being prepared is key. At home, if you don't have a disaster preparedness plan, or as some of my clients would say, a what-if plan, come up with a what-if plan. We're heading into the summer. Spring is just around the corner. Then we're going to get into summer. Plan. Have a plan. If the lights go out, what are we going to do? If, how much food do I have? How long is my food going to last if we're without lights for a day or two? Please plan, because planning saves lives, saves money, and saves stress and frustration. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Paul, for coming to Morbidity and Mortality podcast.
Thank you so much.